The Boxcar Children by Gertrude Chandler Warner. Chapter 6. A Queer Noise in the Night. At last it was dinner time, and the children sat down to see what Henry had in his bundles. "I brought another loaf of brown bread at the store," said Henry, "and some more milk. Then I bought some dried meat because we can eat it in our hands, and I brought a bone for Watch." Watch looked hungrily at the bone and lay down at once to eat it. Jessie got out 4 cups and bowls and put some milk into each one. Then the children put in little pieces of brown bread and began to eat it with their new spoons. "What fun!" cried Jessie, "eating with spoons. Now tell us what you did in town, Henry." Henry began. "The town below this hill is Silver City. I saw the name on a sign. I went into the town and walked along the first street I came to. It was a nice street with big houses and flowers and trees. I saw a man out cutting his grass. He's a good man too, I can tell you, a doctor." "Did you work for him?" asked Jessie. "Yes," said Henry. He was very hot, and just as I came to the house his bell rang. He started to the house, and I called after him and asked if I could cut the grass. He said, yes, I wish you would." You see, he wasn't used to cutting it himself. "So I cut the grass, and he said, 'Good for you. Do you want to work every day?' And he said he had never had a boy who cut it as well as I did." "Oh, Henry," cried Violet and Jessie, "I told him I did want to work, and he told me to come again this afternoon. He has a pretty house and a garage and a big vegetable garden. Then he has a lot of cherry trees behind the house, a cherry orchard. You should see the big, beautiful red cherries. Well, when I was cutting the grass near the kitchen, the cook came to the kitchen door and watched me. She asked me if I liked cookies, and I said I did, and she gave me one." "What did you do with it?" asked Benny hungrily. "Then she went back into the kitchen. I put it in my pocket," said Henry laughingly. "Did she see you?" "Oh, no," said Henry. "I played I was eating it. For a long time I carefully ate away on nothing at all." Benny began to look at Henry's pockets. It did look very funny. Henry went on, "When I came home, the doctor gave me $1, and the cook gave me this bag." Henry laughed at Benny and pulled the bag out of his pocket. In it were 10 delicious brown cookies. Oh, cried Benny. "Please, Jess, let's have cookies for dinner." "Yes, indeed," said Jessie. Then Henry opened his last bundle. "I thought we ought to have a tablecloth," he said, "so I got one at the store, but it wasn't hemmed." Violet begged, "Oh, let me hem it." She took her scissors out of her work bag and cut the 2 ends even. But before she began to hem the pretty blue tablecloth, she helped Jessie wash and rinse the dishes and put them away. Benny helped too. When Henry said goodbye and went back to town, all the children were working happily. Watch was trying to make a hole with one paw to bury his bone. "I'll help you bury your bone, Watch," said Benny. "Oh, no, Benny," said Jess. "Watch wants to bury his bone himself. You come and help me. I'm going to make a broom for the house." For a little while Benny ran around finding sticks for a broom, but he soon went to sleep on the ground with the dog for a pillow. The 2 girls sat by the brook. Violet was hemming the blue tablecloth, and Jess was making the broom with a long stick for a handle. When Henry came back at supper time, the broom with its long handle stood in the kitchen, and the new tablecloth was hemmed. Henry admired the broom and the tablecloth. Then he gave Jessie a small bundle. "Oh, butter!" cried Jess, her eyes shining. It was butter, yellow and sweet. The 4 children had not had any butter for many days. At last they sat down to their fine supper. "Now this spoon is a magic spoon," said Henry. "Turn it around and use the handle, and it is a knife." He showed Benny how to put the butter on the brown bread with his magic knife. With dried meat, bread and butter, milk and cookies, the children could not ask for a better supper. "What did you do this afternoon, Henry?" asked Jessie. "Well, I washed the doctor's car," said Henry. "Then I washed the walks and the windows. Tomorrow I'm going to work in the garden." Then he looked at the brook. "Oh, how I would love to have a swim in that nice cold water." Henry was hot and sticky as he looked at the waterfall. "Maybe we could make a swimming pool," he said. "We could build a dam out of logs." "Oh, yes, we could," said Jessie. "Violet and I know where to find some logs and some big flat stones." "You do?" said Henry. "Oh, yes," said Jessie. "They are not far away, and just a little way below there is a pool now with sand all around it, but it is not big enough to swim in." "Is that so?" cried Henry. "Some day I'll stay at home and we'll try to dam up the brook and make a swimming pool." "You can have my wheels," said Benny. "Good," replied Henry. "I'll make you a little cart with the wheels, Benny, and you can carry stones in it." "Yes," said Benny, "I will." "Come now, we must go to bed," said Jessie. The children were all glad to go to bed. They stood on the stump and climbed into their new house, and they all went to sleep but Henry. He was thinking about the new swimming pool. All at once he saw that Watch was not asleep. Henry patted the dog and said, "Lie down, Watch," but Watch did not lie down. He began to growl softly. "Shh," said Henry to the dog. He sat up. Jessie sat up. "What is it, Henry?" she whispered. "I don't know," replied Henry. He was frightened. "I think Watch hears something in the woods." "Let's close the door," said Jess. "I'm afraid." The two children closed the heavy door softly. Then they sat still and listened, but they did not hear anything. "Lie down, Watch," said Jessie again. "Go to sleep." But Watch did not go to sleep. He growled again. "Maybe someone is in the woods. Maybe someone wants to hide in this car," whispered Jessie. "Maybe," said Henry. "There is something out there that the dog doesn't like." Then they heard a stick crack, and Watch barked. "Oh, shh!" Put the hand over his mouth. "If there is someone out in the woods, he knows that there is a dog in this boxcar," said Henry. He took the new broom in his hand and waited, but nothing came. Nothing at all. The two children waited and waited. Violet and Benny slept through it all. "I'm going to open the door now," said Henry. They opened the door softly and then listened. The dog sniffed a little. Then he turned around 3 times and laid down. He put his head on his paws. "It must be all right now," said Henry. "Watch knows. Maybe it was just a rabbit." So at last they all went to sleep and slept until morning. Chapter 7. A Big Meal from Little Onions. The next morning Jessie and Henry talked about the queer noise. They did not tell Violet and Benny. "What do you think it was?" asked Jessie. "Do you think it was a rabbit?" "I don't know," said Henry, "but I think someone was in the woods. I am glad we weren't hurt. Someone must have stepped on a stick and made it crack." "What shall we do?" asked Jessie. "Nothing," said Henry. "Watch is a good watchdog. He loves us now, and if anyone tried to hurt us, Watch would take care of us. He would do more than growl, but after this we must not let Benny go into the woods alone. I'll keep Benny and Violet with me all the time." "Good," said Henry, "and keep Watch with you all the time too." "Good morning, Benny. Time to get up. Today you must build something for me out of stones." "What is it?" asked Benny eagerly. "I'm not going to tell you," said Henry laughingly. "You build it just as Jessie tells you, and you will see." Henry was so eager to begin work that he ran all the way to town. The doctor came to the door and smilingly looked over him from head to foot. "My mother will tell you what to do today," the doctor said. "She wants you to work in her garden." Mrs. Moore, the doctor's mother, had a sweet face and looked very kind. "Good morning, Henry," she said. "Do you know how to thin out vegetables?" "Oh, yes," said Henry. "I like to work in a vegetable garden." "I haven't had much time to take care of my garden," Mrs. Moore said. "There, see that?" She pulled out a carrot. "It had to come out, for it was much too near the other carrots. Yes, I see, said Henry. He began to thin out the carrots. Mrs. Moore watched him as he pulled out some of the little carrots and put them in a pile. He left the other carrots to grow. Then he began on the turnips. You are a good worker, said Mrs. Moore. I can see that. She smiled at Henry. You may thin out all these vegetables. Then she went into the house and left Henry alone. He worked all the morning. He thinned out the carrots, turnips, and little onions. The mill bells rang at noon, but Henry did not hear them. He still worked on in the hot sun. Then he saw Mrs. Moore looking at him. You have worked long enough, she said. You may come again this afternoon. What shall I do with the vegetables I pulled out? Oh, I don't want them, said Mrs. Moore. Just leave them in a pile. Do you mind if I take them? Asked Henry. No, indeed. Do you have chickens? Then, without waiting for an answer, she went right on. You have done good work. Here is $1. Henry said thank you and was glad he did not have to answer about the chickens. When Mrs. Moore went into the house, he took some of the little carrots and turnips and onions. If he had looked up, he would have seen Mrs. Moore in the window watching him, but he did not look up. He was too eager to get to the store and order some meat. When he arrived at the boxcar, Benny told him, The building is done. I helped with it. The building was a fireplace made of flat stones. Benny did a lot of the work, said Jessie. He carried stones and found wood for the fire. The fireplace was a very good one. The children of Watch had made a hole at the foot of a big rock between two trees. Flat stones were laid on the floor of this hole and around the sides. More big stones were put up to keep out the wind. Jessie had found a heavy wire in the dump and had put the big kettle on it and tied ends of the wire to the two trees. The kettle hung over the fireplace and the fire was laid. Beside the fireplace was a big wood pile. Fine, fine, cried Henry. You have done well. Now see what I have. The girls were delighted with the meat and the little vegetables. With Henry's knife they cut the meat into little pieces. Then they filled the kettle with water from the fountain and put the meat into it with the tin plate for a cover. Henry started the fire and it burned well at once. Jessie cut the tops of the vegetables and washed them in the brook. I'll put them in after the meat has cooked a while. Soon the water began to boil and the stew began to smell good. Watch sat down and looked at it. He sniffed hungrily at it and barked and barked. The children sat around the fireplace eating bread and milk. Now and then Jessie stirred the stew with a big spoon. It will make a good meal, said Henry. Keep it boiling and do not leave it. When I come home tonight, I'll bring you some salt. And whatever you do, don't get on fire. Violet pointed to the pitcher and teapot that she had filled with water. That's to put on Benny or Watch if he should be on fire, she said. Henry laughed and went happily on his way. He wished he could say and smell the stew boiling, but he thought he ought to work, so he went back to Dr. Moore's house. He was very happy when Dr. Moore said, Do you want to clean up this garage? The garage was not in very good order. Dr. Moore laughed when he saw Henry look around for a broom. I must go out now, said Dr. Moore. You just clean this place up. Henry began at once. First he opened all the boxes. On the biggest box he painted the word tools with a long-handled brush and a can of paint he had found. On another box he painted nails. Then he picked over the things and put the tools in the tool box and the nails in the nail box. This was fun for Henry because he liked to get things in order. Henry found a lot of nails that were bent and covered with rust, and he put them in his pocket. I'll ask the doctor for these bent nails, he said to himself. They are no good to him, but they are fine for me. I can use every old nail I can get. Then he washed the floor and washed his paintbrush. When Dr. Moore came home, he found Henry putting brushes, paint cans and other things on the shelf. My, he cried. He looked at the garage and laughed and laughed. He laughed until his mother came out to see what he was laughing at. Look, Mother, he said. Look at those tools. Look at the shelf. Look at my hammers. 1, 2, 3, 4 hammers. Your hammer, my hammer, and 2 other hammers. They were all lost. Can you use a hammer, Henry? Yes, indeed I can, cried Henry. Take one, said Dr. Moore. You found them all. Oh, thank you, he said. He showed the doctor the bent nails and was told that he could have those too. He could hardly wait now to start home because he was so eager to show Benny and his sister his new hammer and nails. Tomorrow will be Sunday, said Dr. Moore. Will you come again the next day? Oh, yes, replied Henry, who had lost all track of days. The cherries must be picked, said the doctor. He looked at Henry in a queer way. We could use any number of cherry pickers if they were all as careful as you. Could you? Asked Harry eagerly. Well, I'll come. So the 3 said goodbye and Henry started for home. He had another $1, a pocket full of old nails, a hammer, and a pile of vegetables that he had left at noon. On the way home he bought some salt. When he arrived at the boxcar, he began to smell a delicious smell. Onions, he shouted, running up to the kettle. I do like the smell of onions. I like the turnips best, said Violet. Jessie took off the cover carefully and stirred in the salt, and Henry sniffed the brown stew. It was boiling and boiling. A ladle of all things, cried Henry. Where did you get it? I found a tin cup in the dump, said Jessie. We used a long stick for a handle and tied it to the cup with a piece of wire. It makes a fine ladle. She ladled out the stew into plates and bowls and put a spoon in each one. Oh, said Benny, I am so hungry I must eat my supper. The meat was well cooked and the vegetables were delicious. Violet passed her plate for more turnips. I'd like some more onions, said Henry. All the children ate until they could eat no more. That was the best meal I ever ate, said Jessie. Me too, said Violet. I have time tonight to make Benny's cart, remarked Henry. We'll want a cart. Will you make it with my wheels? Asked Benny. Yes, with your wheels, answered Henry, but you must cart stones in it when I get it done. Yes, said Benny, I can cart stones or rocks or anything. Tomorrow will be Sunday, and I can stay at home, Henry went on. Do you think it's all right, Jess, to build the dam for a swimming pool on Sunday? Yes, I do, said Jessie. We are making the swimming pool so that we can keep clean. Henry began happily to hammer out the bent nails with his new hammer. Soon he had some good nails. You and I will go and find some boards, Benny, he said. Come on. Soon the boys came back with some boards from the dump. Henry sat down and began to make the cart. He could not see very well because it was getting dark and there was no moon. But at last the cart was done and he gave it to Benny. Thank you, said Benny politely. After his sisters had admired the cart, Benny pulled it around just for fun. Then Henry put it in the boxcar for the night. Henry said to Jess, I hope we do not hear that queer noise tonight. I hope not too, said Jessie. Then she laughed. Look at Benny, she said. He has gone to sleep with a hand on his cart. Henry laughed too, but he laughed at himself because he was going to sleep with his new hammer under his pillow. Chapter 8. A swimming pool at last. The Boxcar children were so tired that they slept until 10 o'clock Sunday morning. When they woke up at last, they hurried through breakfast and went to work on the swimming pool. We'll make a dam across the brook, said Henry. Here is my cart, said Benny. I'll cart stones and logs in it. Good for you, laughed Henry. First the 4 children went down the brook to look at the pool Jessie had seen. The water was quiet here and there was clean sand all around the little pool. It's big enough for a swimming pool, Henry remarked, but I don't think it's deep enough. He put a long stick in it to see how deep it was. Then he looked at the wet stick he found, that the water was about a foot deep. The swimming pool should be about 3 times as deep, he said. Then it will be deep enough to swim in and won't be too deep for Benny. We'll build the dam here with logs and stones." While the other children started the dam, Jessie washed all their stockings. "We don't want our stockings on while we're working in the brook," she remarked as she rinsed them and hung them on the clothesline to dry, "so this is a good time to wash them." It was hard work building the dam, but the children liked hard work. Henry and Jessie pulled the logs to the brook, and Violet and Benny carried the stones with the help of the cart. Now and then Henry was called on to help with a heavy stone, but the two younger children carried most of them. "Splash the stones right into the water," Henry told them, "but be careful to keep them in a line between these two trees." The children watched with delighted eyes as the wall of the stones under the water began to grow higher and higher. "The rock wall will help to hold the logs in place," said Henry. At last it was time to lay the logs across the brook. "Let's lay the first ones between these two trees," said Jessie. "Then the trees will hold both ends of the log." "Good work," cried Henry, much pleased. "That's just what we'll do." But when the first big log was splashed into place on top of the stone wall, the water began to run over the top of the log and around both sides. "Oh dear," cried Jessie, "the water runs around the ends every time. What shall we do?" "We'll have to put logs of logs on, with brush between them," said Henry. "We'll put on so many that the water can't get through." They laid 3 logs across, with 3 more on top of them, and 3 more on top of those. Violet filled her arms with brush and held it in place until each log was laid. Benny filled the holes at the ends of the logs with flat stones. Such wet children never were seen before, but the hot sun would dry them off, and no one cared. When the 3 top logs were laid in place at last, the 4 tired children sat down to watch the pool fill. But Henry could not sit still as the water came higher and higher up the dam. "See how deep the pool is getting," he said. "See how still it is." At last the pool was full, and the water came over the top of the dam and made another waterfall. "Just like a mill dam," said Henry. "Now the pool is deep enough for all of us to swim in." "You boys can have the first swim," said Jessie. "We girls must go and get dinner. We'll ring the bell when we are ready." The boys splashed around in the pool while the girls made a fire and hung the kettle of brown stew over it, stirring it now and then. Violet cut the bread and then got the butter, hard and cold, out of the refrigerator. When everything was ready, Jessie rang the dinner bell. This bell was only a tin can from the dump. Jessie had hung it on a tree with a string, and she rang it with a spoon. Then she got the ladle and began ladling out the stew. "That's the dinner bell," said Benny. "I know it is. Come, Watch. Don't you want some dinner?" Watch had had a swim too. He came out of the water and shook himself. The 2 boys put on their dry clothes and went to Sunday dinner. "Let me ring the bell again," said Benny. "I like stew even better today," said Henry, eating hungrily. "That's because we worked so hard," remarked Jessie. "Let's go for a walk in the woods this afternoon." "Oh, let's," cried Violet. "Let's go exploring again." The children washed the dishes and then started on their walk. As they went along, Watch began to bark. At first the explorers were frightened. "Oh, what is it?" cried Violet. "Maybe it's a rabbit," said Henry. Then they saw a hen running away. Yes, through the woods. Watch ran after her, but Henry called him back. "Don't run after the poor hen," he said. "The hen had a nest," remarked Benny. "What? She had some eggs in it," said Benny. "Come here and see." Jessie looked on the ground where Benny was pointing and saw a nest with 5 eggs in it. "A runaway hen," said Jessie. "She wanted to hide her nest so she could have some chickens. We'll have the eggs for supper. I know how to cook eggs." The eggs made a delicious supper. Jessie put them in a bowl with a little salt, and Violet took a spoon and stirred them as hard as she could. "Put in some milk, Violet," said Jessie, "and stir them some more." Henry started up the fire, and the big kettle was hung over the fire, and Jessie put in some butter. She watched the butter until it was nice and brown, and then she put in the eggs. "Sit down," she said. "Be all ready to eat when the eggs are done." Violet put the blue tablecloth on the ground. She got the bread and butter and plates and spoons, and the children all sat ready for supper. "Here I come," cried Jessie. "Hold out your plates." "Oh, Jessie," cried Benny, "this is the best meal I ever had. I found the eggs and you cooked them." "Yes, you did, Benny," said Henry. "Thank you for a fine meal. Tomorrow we'll have to eat bread and milk," said Jessie. But when tomorrow came, the children had more than bread and milk, as you will soon see. Chapter 9. Fun in the Cherry Orchard. The next morning Henry thought and thought about taking the other children to pick cherries with him. At last he told his sister about it as they ate bread and milk for breakfast. Dr. Morse said he wanted more children to help. "Do you think all of us ought to go, Jessie?" "Well," said Jessie, "I don't know. You see, there are 4 of us. If Grandfather is looking for us, it would be easy to see 4 than 1. "Yes, that's so," said Henry, "but we can go down the hill and through the streets 2 by 2. I'll take Benny and go ahead. Then in a little while you and Violet can come with the dog." "Good," said Jessie. Watch can tell where to go." The children took down the clothesline and shut the door of the car. Everything was in order. Then they started out. When they arrived at the orchard, they soon saw that they were not the only ones working. The doctor was there, and the cook, and 2 men carrying ladders and baskets. "Good morning, Henry," said Mrs. Moore. "Can you work today?" "Oh, yes," said Henry. "These are my sisters, Jessie and Violet. They can pick cherries too. Benny is too young to climb trees, but we had to bring him." "Maybe he can carry baskets," said Dr. Moore, smiling at Benny. "You see, this is a big cherry year, and we have to work fast once we begin. Maybe he can help fill the little baskets from the big ones." "Eat all you want," said Mrs. Moore. "The cherries are beautiful this year." The children didn't eat all they wanted, but every now and then a big red cherry went into someone's mouth. Henry and the girls went up the ladders and began to pick cherries. Watch barked for a while. He did not like to have Jessie climb the ladder. Then he sat down and looked at her up in the tree. Benny hurried here and there, carrying baskets to the pickers and eating all the cherries he wanted. Everyone in the orchard liked Benny. The doctor laughed delightedly at him, and sweet Mrs. Moore fell in love with him at once. By and by he sat down beside her and carefully filled small baskets with cherries from the big baskets. The men laughed at the funny things Benny said, and Watch barked happily. By and by the doctor left the orchard to make some calls. At last Mrs. Moore said, "I've never had such happy cherry pickers before. You are having such a good time out there that I didn't want to go in the house." She smiled. Mary the cook seemed to think the same thing, for she came again and again into the orchard. After a while the cook went in to get dinner, but the children still picked cherries. At noon Dr. Moore came home. "You must stay to dinner," he said to the children. "We can eat here in the orchard under the trees. Will your mother be watching for you?" Then when he asked this, he looked at Henry in a queer way. Henry did not know what to say, but at last Jessie said, "No, our mother and father are dead." "Then you must stay," said Mrs. Moore. "Here comes Mary." The cook put a table under the trees, and they all sat around it and ate a delicious dinner. Then Mary went into the house and came out again with big bowls of cherry dumplings. "I can smell something good," cried Benny. "Is it cherries?" "Yes, my little dear," said Mary. "Cherries, dumplings. The cherries are cooked in the dumplings." Benny ate his cherry dumplings and then went to sleep with the dog for a pillow. But Henry and Jessie and Violet began to work again. Mrs. Moore looked out of the window at them. "Just see how those children work," she said to Dr. Moore. "And they are so polite too. I wonder who they are." Dr. Moore said nothing. After a while he went out to the orchard. "You have worked long enough," he said. He gave them $4 and all the cherries they could carry. "That is too much," said Henry. "No," said Dr. Moore, "it is just right. You see, you are better than most workers because you are so happy. Come again." "I'll come every day," said Benny. They all laughed. Dr. Moore saw that the children did not all leave the orchard at the same time, but started down the street 2 by 2. "I wish I knew who they are," he said to himself. When the cherry pickers got back to their little home, they looked everything over carefully, but things were just as they had left them. The door was still closed, and the milk and butter were in the refrigerator. The children made a happy supper of bread and butter and cherries and then went to bed in the boxcar. That same night, Dr. Moore sat reading the paper. All at once he saw the word "lost" and began to read. Lost. 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, somewhere around Greenfield or Silver City. $5,000 to anyone who can find them. James Henry Alden. Dr. Moore sat up. $5,000, he said. James Henry Alden. Oh my, oh my. He sat still for a long time, thinking and laughing to himself. The 4 children are living in a boxcar, but I shall not tell Mr. Alden that they are his grandchildren, he said.